With the success of television series Game of Thrones and medieval simulator games like Crusader Kings 2, it's not so strange first-time game developer Brave at Night staked their debut game, Yes, Your Grace, on a stylized simulation of a king making tough decisions in olden times.
Wah. Obama. Kibi.
Yes, Your Grace is perhaps best described as a simulator. It's a game that largely relies on its narrative more than its mechanics. To its credit, much of Yes, Your Grace's style and charm set it up to be a new favorite within the niche it occupies, but a handful of poor design decisions hold it back from achieving its potential. Yes, Your Grace gives players control of King Eric of Davern, a husband and father to 3 daughters trying to make ends meet for his kingdom. The story begins in media res, and shows Eric rallying the troops before a significant battle during a siege of his own castle. The story then flashes back to deliver the story, which is a good way of communicating to the player the length of the game. The game's loop consists of completing a variety of actions for each week of the year. Complete 52 weeks, and you're at the end of the game. For each week in the year, Eric must make decisions at court. This is presented to the player as a stream of NPCs entering the throne room and making some sort of request. Successfully completing these requests will result in either men to join your military or contentment to keep your subjects happy. You need men to prepare for the coming battles, and you need contentment to prevent a revolt against your rule. The nature of these requests can be anything from building a shrine to letting a poet follow you around for a few weeks, but they ultimately pull from 3 main resources: gold, supplies, and time. The latter resource is really the time of your agents. These agents can be sent around the map to explore the world, or sometimes throne room requests specifically ask for one of these agents' assistance. Eric's family plays an important role in the game's storyline and hooking the player's interests. Simulation games tend to balance between narrative and mechanics, and it's clear the hook for Yes, Your Grace is the narrative. Each of the family members plays a role in the game's story, making it easy to get attached to these characters, which shapes how you make your decisions. Still, players should temper their expectations for the amount of freedom they have. Yes, Your Grace is a very guided experience and doesn't have any randomized mechanics to add variety through multiple playthroughs. Even with that in mind, the experience quickly becomes disappointing. Most of this disappointment comes from arbitrary mechanics. On a macro level, the game tells you how you can succeed or fail, but the specifics are vague. You know your kingdom needs gold, supplies, men, and contentment, but there is no way to proactively seek out these resources. Your ability to rule is based on the requests you get from your subjects. One of the most infuriating drains of your resources is paying gold to retain agents each week. You choose which agents to hire during the end of week summary, so you exclusively decide if you need an agent without anything informing that decision. It's pure guesswork, which, as we all know, is a pillar of rewarding game design. As you progress through the game, it becomes obvious there are artificial modifications to increase the difficulty. You start your rule with 20 contentment, and early in the game, failed requests may net -1 contentment. If it's a truly monumental failure, you might receive -2 contentment. Late in the game, I chose not to decide which grieving mother got ownership of a newly found child, and I got whacked with -5 contentment. I feel like that decision was way less important than the flooded village I chose not to help because I ran out of money earlier in the game. In fact, a lot of the endgame content scaling is bizarre. It seems simultaneously way too punishing and exempt from any consequence. Leading up to the final battle, my contentment dipped to -2, resulting in a peasant revolt where I gave up 25 gold and 20 supplies to keep the peace. This hefty cost ensured I could only complete a fraction of the required objectives prior to the finale. It didn't end up mattering because even as my soldiers starved and my enemy eviscerated my meager defenses, I cruised to a good ending. Although honestly, if I got a bad ending, or worse, a game over, after an extended 20-minute battle sequence, I would have been pissed. My endgame experience may be emblematic of the disappointment inherent to Yes, Your Grace. It's a game concept that has a lot going for it, but by the end, you're just looking for a reason to write it off completely. Looking at the developer's original Kickstarter, it seems that this game has had a dramatic transformation from something more procedural to a very guided narrative. This change could explain the weakness in the game's design. I'm sure things like difficulty were an afterthought, and thrown in without much context of what made the game any fun. I wish the developer would have relied more on its narrative rather than its mechanics. In the same way, no one thinks of games like Papers, Please or This War of Mine as easy, even if their challenges are rather trivial. Unfortunately, the flaw of the mechanics makes an otherwise enjoyable game immensely frustrating. Yes, Your Grace's clean presentation and likable plot elements do a lot to win over the player, but it's not enough to stomach the bad taste left by vague objectives and arbitrary fail states. Noisy Pixel is giving Yes, Your Grace a 5.5 out of 10.